Hello, can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, and thank you so much for having us. My name is Christian Estmann. I'm a co-author of this paper, Economic Complexity and Structural Transformation in the case of Mozambique, together with Bjørn Bo Sørensen, Nilda Francisco Sarmiento, and John Rand. Bjørn and I will today present for you and give you an idea of the methods that we use and how these can be applied in the formulation of a new industrial development plan for Mozambique. So, as you may know, Mozambique's current industrial policy regime evolves around the National Development Strategy, which gives focus to these 5 sectors: agriculture, fishery, extractives, tourism, and manufacturing, where the industrial policy strategy focuses on these 7 subsectors within manufacturing. So these are agro-processing and food, it's clothing, textiles, it's also paper and printing and chemicals and so on. And these sectors have been chosen based on a broad set of policy objectives, many of which we also use in our study. So what we do is that we develop a supply and demand framework to identify an alternative set of target sectors for Mozambique to focus on. So the supply side looks at is based on the literature on economic complexity, which is a method that can identify sectors which are important for a structural transformation based on the capabilities within a country, in this case, Mozambique. And then we extend this complexity method with a demand side analysis using gravity model regressions to identify the export potential of each sector. So first of all, I'd like to give you an idea of the theory of which this paper is based on, the theory of economic complexity. And afterwards, Bjørn will elaborate on the methods and show our results. So the way economists traditionally thought about development and tried to explain the large differences we see in income and productivity across countries over time is by aggregating things, aggregating land, aggregating capital and human capital, and then trying to find the relationship between these factors of production and the total value of production, the GDP. However, by doing this, we lose a lot of information. So the reality is way more complex, right? So because countries produce millions of different things, from haircuts to motorcycles, and the inputs that goes into producing these things are very different, the know-how and so on. And if it was so that technology was the answer to this productivity gap, why doesn't it diffuse? So the problem in order to implement a technology is that the crucial ingredient here is the know-how. So what Ricardo Hausmann and Cesar Hidalgo did was trying to conduct a theory, a method that could capture the more complexity of the production without having to use these aggregated measures. And they call this economic complexity. So their hypothesis is that development is about the accumulation of know-how, the accumulation and diffusion of collective know-how, to be exact. So it's according to this theory, it is the division of know-how within a society that underpins the capacity to do more things and more sophisticated things. And hence, rich countries tend to be more diversified, and products that require many inputs, more capabilities, are more difficult to make, and therefore few countries make these products. And using this simple trick, Hausmann Hidalgo is actually able to quantify how complex the capability space of countries is and how complex products are. So Hausmann uses the game of Scrabble as an analogy to make this more understandable, and I will try to make him justice. In the game of Scrabble, you have to make words and you are given letters. So if you think of words as products, goods, and services, letters is the bits of know-how. So in order to make a word, you need the bits of know-how. You have to string these know-how together, these letters together. And so if you only have one kind of letter, you can only make one kind of product, word. Whereas if you have more letters, it becomes easier to produce more words and longer words, more complex products. So, and at the same time, products that require many letters are only able to be made by these players who have all these letters. So Hausmann and Hidalgo is able to empirically see that this actually is the case. So in this graph, you see that the x-axis here, let me see here, is the diversification of the products within a country, and the y-axis is how common the products are, how many countries produce the products that the given country does. So we plot the countries and see that Germany and the United States are the most diversified countries in the world. And they also make a very unique product, very exclusive product that not many countries are able to make. And at the same time, in this yellow box, you see that poorer countries make fewer words, fewer products, and they are not very complex. You see that many countries are able to make these. So because of this, they are able to make an index of economic complexity. And they find that this is actually very much aligned with income. So here, countries are again plotted between the economic complexity index and the log of GDP per capita. And we find that Mozambique is here with a relatively complex compared to how rich they are. This, according to theory, actually suggests that there are true potential for economic growth. Because what the theory finds, or what the method finds, is that the residuals in this simple model actually fits really well with predicted growth. And this is what Hausmann and Hidalgo have done here on the right figure. You see predicted average growth from 1985 to 2005, and to the x-axis, the average growth. And you see this fits really well. So it's very important, and it can actually explain income and growth. So, but Hausmann and Hidalgo didn't stop here. They tried to fit this hypothesis into how production evolves. And the theory tried to explain and isolate how countries can move from producing their current set of products to a new set of products in the future, which are more complex, but is fairly easy because of their capabilities they already have. So this Hausmann and Hidalgo observes that countries move from products to other products that uses similar capabilities, similar letters in the game of Scrabbles, just adding just a few letters or two. And by this, they can measure the relatedness between products, how many letters the products share. And this they try to illustrate in a network called the product space. So this is what we have here to the right. So the bubbles is the products, and the colors represent the sectors. So we see that the heterogeneity of products, right? We see that products are clustered. Some product sectors are clustered together, very interlinked. These are machinery. The green cluster is textiles. The linkages between is the products which are most related. Yes. Moreover, we see in the periphery of the space, we see mineral products, and we see precious stones, some animal products here. We see these are in the periphery of the space, meaning that they are not very interlinked with other products, right? So they don't have many products in common. On the right here, the sectors are plotted against how connectedness, how related they are to other sectors, other products, with how complex they are. And these are quite correlated as well. This means that when a country moves from producing products in the periphery of the space, moving inwards towards the center of the space, the products they will be able to make are more complex, but also are more related to other products, meaning that the diversification becomes easier and easier. And so when you start the industrialization process, it actually will become easier. So what we do is trying to map Mozambique in this space. And here you see the bubbles with colors is now the products which Mozambique have a comparative advantage in. And so we see there's some mineral products, we see some precious stones, some animal products and so on, and a few more complex products within this, in the center of the space. So what we then do is trying to find the right industries that Mozambique can promote in order to accumulate new knowledge, which are more complex. So they are closer to the center of the space, and they are, as well as being nearby what they are currently making, so they can make them with some ease. And this is an analysis which has been made many times. It's been made in South Africa, it's made in Rwanda, in Jordan, in Myanmar, in Netherlands, and so on. But it lacks of, especially at the demand side of things, the demand for products. So we have tried to do this by using gravity model estimations in order to rank these products, these sectors, in their potential for export revenue to Mozambique. So this is our main contribution to the literature. Other studies has also tried to evaluate the attractiveness of sectors in Mozambique, especially using CGE models around the agriculture and agri-processing sectors. So here we contribute with a new methodology to evaluating these sectors. Yes, so now Bjørn will take over, and yes, I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you so much.
So let me see here. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I think you would switch to presentation, yeah.
Yes, let me do that. And let me just hide the meeting controls. Okay. So let me now take you through our actual analysis, our approach, and how we identify different products and our main conclusions from our study, now that Christian has laid out the basic idea behind what we are actually doing. And I'll start by just explaining a little bit about the data that we use. And I think one of the neat things about our current research is that it actually primarily just relies on international trade data, which is publicly available and collected by UN. And we would then rely on a special data set that is cleaned by the Growth Lab at Harvard University, which is also publicly available. In our supply side analysis that builds on this economic complexity idea, we use trade data at the exporter product level, where we have export values for more than 1,000 products, for more than 100 countries, for more than 20 years. And we then use this data to calculate the structural transformation potential of different products. In our demand side analysis, we use a slightly different structure of the data. So here we use trade data at the exporter-importer product level. So here we use trade, we get trade values of 84 target products that we identify in the supply side analysis, and we have information for almost 200 countries for an 8-year period. We then supplement this data with data on GDP from the World Bank, on regional trade agreements from the World Trade Organization, and on various distance measures that are common in the gravity model literature that we get from CEPI. So this data is then used to run gravity models to estimate the export potential of the identified target products across different destinations. So let me go now to our supply side analysis and explain exactly what it is we are doing. So just to reiterate what Christian has said already, our goal is here to identify new products and sectors that will contribute to economic complexity in Mozambique and that the country can relatively easily develop because they're close to those products in the product space. So the basic approach we take is we use these network science methods that have been developed in the field of economic complexity to calculate this structural transformation process. And I will not go into the math behind these calculations now, but I'm happy to discuss it in the Q&A session if that will bring some clarity to what we're doing. But the basic intuition is something I will highlight here. So we develop 3 criteria for measuring the attractiveness of a product. The first criteria is the complexity of the product. So all else equal, we would like Mozambique to move into more complex products because the complexity is associated with economic growth. Secondly, we value the ease of development of a new sector or product. So we basically assign a higher value to products that rely on the productive capabilities or the know-how that Mozambique already has. So products that lie close to the current products that Mozambique have in this network called the product space. Thirdly, we value what we call a stepping stone potential for products. So what is that? That is basically we value products that if Mozambique require the capabilities to produce those products, it will be more easy for Mozambique to move into other products that are more complex. So this is basically products that if you require those capabilities, it will be easier to move into the more dense parts of the product space. We now have 3 different measures for the attractiveness of a product, but we want to combine this into an index so we can conduct our analysis at the product level. In order to do that, we take a weighting scheme approach, which is standard in the literature. It's not ideal, but this is what most studies do. So what we do is we combine all 3 measures of attractability into one measure by assigning a weight to each of these 3 measures and then summing over these weighted measures, where we have standardized the measures on beforehand for each product. So now we can compare products one-to-one using this index of attractiveness. So what do we find? We identify 84 target products that are especially important for Mozambique to boost structural transformation. Here you see the number of target products we find within different sectors. I think there are 3 main points to take away from this graph. So firstly, you can see that we actually find target products in many different sectors. So the current focus on a broad range of sectors in Mozambique's industrial policy is actually aligning very well with what we find here. So a broad sectoral focus is something Mozambique should continue. Secondly, we do find that some of the products that Mozambique, some of the sectors that Mozambique is currently prioritizing seems to be especially important and can be thought of as potential pillars in a structural transformation policy. So this includes metals and different agriculture and agri-industry products, where we find many target products in these sectors. Finally, and perhaps most interestingly, is that we also find some sectors that seems to have a very high structural transformation potential, but that are currently not included as priority sectors in Mozambique. This includes machinery and electronics, various instruments and vehicles and transport equipment. So these are sectors where we actually find a lot of target products. Our supply side analysis. Let us now go to the demand side of things. So just to reiterate, we have now found 84 target products.
Sorry, if I could,
yeah.
Could I ask you to turn your video off, because there's some delay in your audio and it might be because of bandwidth issues. I guess we are having bandwidth issues with Bjørn.
Let me just jump to my personal hotspot on my phone. Okay. Can you hear me again?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay.
But it also helps you if you turn your video off.
Okay.
I will save a bit. Yes,
sure.
Excellent.
I will turn that off and go to presenter mode again. Okay, let's try one more time. So we are now in the demand side of things. So to reiterate, we want to rank these different target products that we have found in accordance with their export potential for Mozambique. So how do we do that? We do that through gravity model estimation. So what we basically do is we run a gravity model at the product level. So we basically run a gravity regression for each of these 84 target products to allow for product-specific coefficients. And we estimate this gravity model with a Poisson pseudo-maximum likelihood estimator. So the regression looks like this. So what we basically do is that we regress the trade volume, T, between an exporter I and an importer N in a product P in a year, T. And we regress that on a vector of dyadic distance measures that are standard in the literature, such as physical distance, whether people share a border, common language, etc. And then we include importer year fixed effects and exporter year fixed effects. With this model, we can then use the estimated coefficients to predict the potential for these products that Mozambique is not currently exporting. So we can predict the potential for each product, but also the potential for exporting these products to different regions. And I want to show you a little bit about how we reach those conclusions now. So what you're looking at here is basically a similar graph to before, but now you're looking at the average predicted export value of the 84 target products within each of the sectors that we talked about before. And here we have normalized the values between 0 and 1. Again, I think there are 3 things you can take away. So firstly, on top of the graph, you can see that while we didn't find a lot of target products within the mineral sector, the target products that we did find actually seem to have a very high export potential. So this is something that Mozambique can consider. So here there might be a trade-off between the structural transformation potential of the mineral sector, but on the other hand, it has a high export potential. On the other hand, or the second thing you should think about is that some of these pillars that we talked about before that are currently prioritized in Mozambique's structural industrial policy, such as metals and agriculture and agri-industry products, they actually also seem to have a high per product predicted export potential. So this means that these products and these sectors can both drive structural transformation, and they also have a high export potential. And then thirdly, again, it is worth to highlight that we find a high per product export potential for some of the sectors that are currently not included in Mozambique's industrial policy documents. So this is what it looks like when you look at the analysis at the product level. But our gravity estimations also allow to look at export potential across different markets. So what you're seeing here is a scatter plot of all the different potential export markets in Mozambique. On the y-axis, you see countries' current share of Mozambique's exports in 2018. So you see that the highest importers of Mozambique's exports are India, South Africa, China, and Italy in the top of the graph. On the x-axis, we have then plotted the predicted share of these countries in Mozambique's target exports. So it says something about which countries are likely to drive the demand for Mozambique's target products. I should note that the scale here is log 10. So it basically means -1 is equal to 10%, minus 2 is equal to 1%, etc., etc. So what can we take away from this graph? So if you look in the lower left quadrant, we basically see what we call low potential markets. So this is markets that are not very important at the moment for Mozambique. So the country doesn't export a lot to these markets. And also we don't predict that these markets will drive any demand in the future in these target products. If we move up to the upper left quadrant, we find what we call hard to exploit markets. So this is markets that are currently important for Mozambique's exports, but we don't think that these markets will drive demand in the target products that we have identified. More interesting is if we move to the right of the figure. So in the top, we find what we call high potential markets. So this is countries that are currently very important for Mozambique's exports and also likely to be very important for Mozambique's exports of new, more complex products. In the lower right quadrant of the figure, we then find we have what we call high opportunity markets. So this is markets where Mozambique is currently not exporting a lot, but markets that actually have the potential to drive a lot of demand in target products. And what we see here is that there are especially some of Mozambique's neighbors and countries in the region that seems to actually have a high demand for some of these target products that Mozambique could move into. So this includes Angola, Eswatini, Zimbabwe, and Tanzania, for instance. So the conclusions from our analysis that I have just presented to you, of course, have certain limitations. And I'll just go through some of them, and I'm sure that you guys can find more, and we are looking forward to the discussion afterwards. But one of the limitations is, of course, related to the data that we use in the analysis. So one limitation is we are only able to look at the tradable sector because we look at international trade data. So, of course, there's a large part of Mozambique's economy that is invisible in our analysis because it is not traded and not exported. There are some studies that show that, especially in developed countries, that especially in manufacturing, the export structure somewhat mirrors the local productive structure. And we hope to some extent this is true in Mozambique, but of course we cannot tell because we don't have the data. A second limitation is that we don't have service data. So there's no detailed trade statistics on tradable services, and therefore we are only thinking about tradable products. And as services become a more and more important part of economies, of course, this is a major drawback of the analysis, but it's something we simply cannot say anything about. And then there is another data limitation that we have discussed with various people before, but that should be noted. And that is, at the moment, we cannot distinguish between what is domestic production in Mozambique that is exported and what are products that are simply just imported and then re-exported. These limitations mean that we might incorrectly attribute some of the re-exports to actually being productive capabilities in Mozambique. And that is, of course, a drawback, and we haven't completely solved this issue yet. Finally, when you look at the policy side of things, I think it's also important to notice that the criteria that we have used to select products are more narrow than the criteria listed in the industrial policy and strategy. For instance, our target sectors say nothing about the employment generation potential in different sectors. And of course, policymakers, they need to consider all relevant objectives when they try to prioritize supporting different sectors. So let me jump to the conclusion. So just to reiterate what we have done, we have combined, we have developed this supply and demand framework to analyze or identify what sectors are important to drive structural transformation in Mozambique, and also which sectors could then drive export revenue. In addition, we have also identified which markets are important to drive demand for these products. So what do we find? If we look at the products, we find that the broad sectoral focus of Mozambique's current policy is largely in line with this ambition to boost structural transformation. We also find, however, that especially agriculture, agro-industry, and metals seems especially important to drive this structural transformation. And this is sectors that are currently prioritized, at least de jure, in Mozambique's industrial policy. Thirdly, we also see that there are certain unaddressed opportunities in machinery and electronics and vehicle and transport equipment that might lead us to say that this is sectors that should be thought of more about whether there is actually potentials here that to develop these industries in the future. In terms of export destinations, we find that Mozambique's current trade partners are also important and are predicted to be the most important destinations for Mozambique's target products. But we also find that some of the neighboring countries around Mozambique have a high potential to actually drive demand in some of the products we identify as important. So with the apologies about my connection, this will be the final words of the presentation, and we are very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Bjørn and Christian. Actually, I think after the correction that